These 7 roller coasters no longer exist, but I rode them before they disappeared. Some of them are world's firsts, some of them are just bizarre, and I guarantee the last one on this list you've never heard of. Let's rewind. Right, this first one is here in the UK, and if you are roughly the same age as me, this could very well have been one of your first major coasters. Now, it was quite iconic. It was made by the manufacturer Vekoma, and it was the Corkscrew at Alton Towers. Now, I didn't remember going on this coaster until I was going through an old set of photos and came across a ride photo of me in my teens on the ride. So I definitely done it. It closed in 2008 to make way for 13, which some would say is a better ride, some would disagree. And it lives on at the entrance to the park, or at least that iconic Corkscrew does. Although Towers needs a little bit of TLC, give it a paint job. Right, there are not many roller coasters manufactured by Bolliger & Mabillard that have been removed. There are a couple, and the next one falls into that bracket. In fact, it was 2 coasters that used to duel against each other. So you probably know exactly the ride I'm about to mention. And that was Dueling Dragons, or Dragon's Challenge, in Universal's Islands of Adventure. Now, this was visually spectacular because, as the name suggests, the 2 coasters would duel. And there was loads of near-miss elements where they would kind of come together. It was a very clever system, in fact, where on the way up the lift hill, they would weigh each of the trains and adjust their speed to guarantee that they actually went past each other at key moments. Something that I believe the Stardust Racers at Epic Universe has also introduced to guarantee that dueling element. The ride unfortunately had some issues. There was a number of incidents where loose articles came off one guest on one train and struck a guest on the other train, including some fairly severe accidents. So towards the end of its life, the dueling element was disabled and you would only get 1 train dispatched at a time, which then kind of took away its USP, and it was just 2 coasters that happened to be next to each other. Of course, it has then been removed and replaced with Hagrid's magical motorbike adventure crazy creature. You know the big long thing? The big motorbikes? That's there now. And the next one is back here in the UK. Now, this is another manufacturer that is becoming very, very difficult to find nowadays because more and more of these rides are getting too old and removed, and there aren't any new ones. So this was a Schwarzkopf coaster, and it was an indoor ride. Now, it started off its life kind of rat themed. It was known as the Rat Ride. It was sort of sewers on the way in and on the way out, and then it became Raptor Attack, and it was kind of dinosaur themed. Now this was at Lightwater Valley, which, to be honest, doesn't really fit that park, especially not now. They've gone very family, but this was quite a dark theme, sort of more the sort of thing you would expect from Thorpe Park. But I managed to get on this. I didn't actually, it's another one I didn't recall getting on until I found some photos of me and my daughter looking terrified. Heading back over to the US, we have another coaster by the same manufacturer, so yet another Schwarzkopf. Now this one, there was only ever 3 of this model manufactured, and the other 2 were travelling. So this was the only permanent installation. Interestingly, one of them with the same layout was featured at Camelot here in the UK. But this ride that I'm talking about is Scorpion over at Busch Gardens. Now, wasn't the most thrilling attraction by modern standards. It was a looping coaster, which, you know, at the time was quite thrilling. Certainly for Busch Gardens, I think it was their 2nd coaster ever. I got on it last year, and it got removed this year. Closed not long after I was there, and it has now been demolished. So, did you get on Scorpion? Right, this next one is back in the UK, and there are some people who are still quite sore about this being removed, even 7 years on. And that is a coaster here in Blackpool. Now, it was a wooden coaster, and it didn't look too bad off-ride, but trust me, it was brutal. Of course, we're talking about the Wild Mouse. Now, this was an interesting coaster because it was built in-house. It was modified, so it started off as 2 levels, went to 3. Not long after it was constructed, they added an extra level. And it was genuinely a Wild Mouse. Like, it was the proper crazy, throwing you around, you're coming off that track. You know, the forces that you got on this were ridiculous, the brakes were intense. Actually, towards the end of its life, in its final year of operation, they applied some magnetic brakes to try and tame the thing, but it still got removed that close season without any warning, and still is a vacant spot in the park to this day. So as I said, many people are quite sore about this one. If you never got on it, you're not gonna. If I stayed in the UK, there's another coaster here that I got on with my kids a few years ago. It's been closed for a few years, so maybe a couple more than a few. And that is in Chessington, and it was Scorpion Express. Now, there was nothing special around this one. It was a fairly straightforward track. In fact, prior to it being Scorpion Express, its original incarnation was a runaway train, I think it was. The trains looked very similar to the runaway mine train at Alton Towers, and it had this kind of rock facade that you went into. So it was a partly enclosed coaster, and then when they rethemed it, 2012 I think it was, they took all that away, they put this kind of animatronic scorpion thing in, but it looked kind of bland, to be honest. I didn't experience the first version, but I've seen footage of it, and yeah, it's believed that there was a small fire on the train. Don't think anybody was on the ride at the time, and it stood SB&O, standing not operating, for quite some time before the park finally confirmed that it is going. It has now been removed, and it is getting replaced with a Paw Patrol themed coaster next year. And this next one is super rare, and you probably don't even know this existed. But in the UK in the 90s, there was a park known as Granada Studio Tours. And it was kind of that TV thing, so I'm sure there was Coronation Street themed stuff and all that, but they did have some rides, and one of them was the world's first flying coaster. Now many of you might think, world's first flying coaster, that was Galactica, right? That was the B&M thing. No, this thing predated it, and was a very, very strange contraption. Now, conceptually similar to something like the Zamperla ride in Flamingo Land, known as Hero. You've probably seen them in other parks as well, where you kind of get into this thing, this cage, and it picks you up. It was sort of like that. You were in this contraption, but it was a one-man contraption. So the throughput on this thing was terrible, because it wasn't the most reliable ride, and they could only put one person on it at a time, so it did not get through a big queue, and there was always long queues to get on it. I did, however, manage to get on this thing, and it was terrifying, because you're in this really weird position, all on your own, flying around this track. Yeah, crazy. It was actually named after an event on the Gladiators, so that was a TV show on at that point on Granada Studios. It is back now, and one of the events was called Skytrak, so this was named after that. It didn't last very long. In fact, it closed 1 year later, so very lucky to have got this credit. Right, which ones of these would you bring back, and are there any that you have got that are super rare credits? Let me know in the comments. If you've enjoyed this one, hit that like button. Please do subscribe. I've been Chris, you've been watching Coaster Dad. See you in the next one.